The rain pounded against my door, a relentless drumbeat that shattered the stillness of the night. As I peered through the peephole, the sight that greeted me sent a jolt of fear through my weary bones. There, drenched and desperate, stood my grandson Nolan, cradling my great-granddaughter Lily in his shivering arms. With a trembling hand, he knocked again, his eyes pleading for help. I didn't hesitate, swinging the door open to usher them inside out of the storm. "Nolan, what on earth?" I gasped, ushering them into the warmth of the living room. "What's happened?" Nolan's usually vibrant green eyes were rimmed with tears, and his voice quivered as he spoke. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I didn't know where else to go. Lily's sick, and He paused, his gaze dropping to the bundle in his arms. "It's Dad. He's in trouble." I felt my heart sink. Trouble with Micah was never a simple matter. As I guided Nolan to the sofa, my husband Gideon emerged from the kitchen, his brow furrowed with concern. "What's going on?" he asked, his deep voice rumbling with worry. Nolan took a shaky breath. "Dad's been gambling. He's in debt, and his new girlfriend, Kara, He squeezed his eyes shut, a single tear escaping down his cheek. "She's isolating him from us. He's not taking care of Lily and me anymore." Gideon's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. I knew that look. It was the same one he wore when he'd returned home from the shop, frustrated and angry. But this time, the anger was tinged with a deep, profound sorrow. "That boy," Gideon muttered, shaking his head. I thought he was finally getting his life back on track. I placed a hand on Gideon's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Nolan, tell us everything," I said, my voice soft but firm. "We're here to help." And so, through halting words and trembling breaths, as Nolan laid bare the painful truth. Micah's descent into gambling, Kara's manipulative hold over him, the neglect that had left Lily sick and Nolan alone and terrified. It was a heartbreaking tale, one I wished I'd never had to hear. As Nolan finished, Gideon let out a heavy sigh, running a weathered hand through his silver hair. "This is a mess, Alara," he said, his gaze meeting mine. "We can't just sit by and let that boy destroy his family." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "We won't," I replied, placing a reassuring hand on Nolan's knee. "We'll fix this, Nolan. I promise." Nolan's eyes widened with a glimmer of hope. "You will?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course, child," I said, offering him a gentle smile. "You and Lily are our family. We'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Gideon moved to Nolan's side, clasping his shoulder with a calloused hand. "You've done the right thing, coming to us," he said, his gruff tone tinged with pride. "Now, let's see what we can do to help your father." As Nolan nodded, leaning into Gideon's embrace, I knew that the road ahead would not be an easy one. But in that moment, with my family gathered together, I felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that we could overcome the darkness that threatened to consume us. Whatever lay ahead, we would face it together, united by the unbreakable bonds of love and resilience. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Gideon and I huddled in the kitchen, nursing our mugs of strong coffee. The weight of Nolan's revelations still hung heavy in the air, and I could see the gears turning in my husband's mind. "This is worse than I thought," Gideon rumbled, his brow furrowed in a deep frown. "That boy's always been reckless, but getting mixed up with a woman like Kara? It's a recipe for disaster." I nodded solemnly, the image of Nolan's tearful face searing in my memory. "I can't imagine what those poor children have been through," I murmured, my heart aching for Lily and Nolan. Micah was supposed to learn from his mistakes, not repeat them. Gideon's jaw tightened, and I knew that tone all too well. "Well, he's going to learn, one way or another," he growled, the veins in his neck standing out. "I won't stand by and let him drag his family down with him." Before I could respond, a soft whimper carried from the living room, and we both rushed to Lily's side. The poor thing was burning with fever, her tiny face contorted in discomfort. Nolan hovered over her, his expression a mixture of fear and helplessness. "Grandma, Grandpa, I don't know what to do," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "Lily's been sick for days, and Dad doesn't even seem to care." Gideon's eyes narrowed, a muscle in his jaw twitching. "Don't you worry, son," he said, placing a gentle hand on Nolan's shoulder. "We're going to take care of Lily, and we're going to fix this mess with your father." I hurried to the bathroom, grabbing a cool, damp cloth to press against Lily's forehead. As I tended to the sick child, Gideon ushered Nolan into the kitchen, their voices rising in a heated discussion. "Tell me everything you know about this Kara woman," Gideon demanded, his deep timbre brooking no argument. Nolan's eyes darted nervously, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. I don't know much," he stammered. "All I know is that she's been controlling Dad, keeping him away from us. She's mean, and she—" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "She's been selling drugs, I think. That's how she's been getting the money for Dad's gambling debts." Gideon's expression darkened, a shadow of something I hadn't seen in years crossing his features. "I see," he murmured, his voice low and dangerous. I stepped into the kitchen, my heart racing. "Gideon, what are you thinking?" I asked, a note of trepidation in my voice. Gideon turned to me, his eyes burning with a resolute determination. "I'm thinking it's time we paid a visit to this Kara woman," he said, his words clipped and sharp, "and maybe dredge up a few old contacts while we're at it." I felt a chill run down my spine, memories of Gideon's past resurfacing. "Gideon, you can't be serious," I protested, reaching out to him. "Violence won't solve anything." Gideon caught my hand, his calloused fingers enveloping mine. "Alara, this isn't about violence," he said, his gaze softening. "It's about protecting our family. And sometimes you have to fight fire with fire." I searched his eyes, seeing the unwavering determination there. With a resigned sigh, I gave a slight nod. "All right," I conceded, "but promise me you'll be careful." Gideon squeezed my hand, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I promise," he said, turning to Nolan. "Now, tell me everything you know about this Kara woman." As Nolan began to speak, I couldn't help but wonder what exactly Gideon had planned. But in that moment, all that mattered was protecting our family, no matter the cost. The rain had finally let up, but the air in our small town still felt heavy with unease. As Gideon and I drove to Micah's apartment, the tension in the car was palpable. Nolan sat in the back seat, his brow furrowed with a mix of worry and anticipation. "Are you sure about this, Grandpa?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want things to get worse." Gideon glanced at him through the rearview mirror, his expression softening. "Don't you worry, son," he said, his gruff tone oddly comforting. "We're not going to make anything worse. We're just going to have a little talk with your father." I reached back, giving Nolan's knee a gentle squeeze. "Everything's going to be all right, Nolan," I reassured him, though part of me wondered if I was trying to convince him or myself. As we pulled up to the familiar apartment building, memories came flooding back. Of Micah as a young boy, full of promise and ambition. How could it have all gone so wrong? Gideon caught my gaze, that familiar resolve etched on his weathered features. "Ready?" he asked, and I gave him a solemn nod. We made our way to Micah's door, Nolan trailing behind us. I could hear the muffled sounds of raised voices from within, and my heart sank. Taking a deep breath, Gideon knocked firmly. The door flew open, and there stood Micah, his eyes wild and his hair disheveled. "What are you two doing here?" he snapped, his gaze darting between Gideon and me. "We're here to talk, Micah," Gideon said, his voice calm but firm, "about Nolan and Lily." Micah's expression darkened, and a woman's voice, Kara's, came from inside the apartment. "Who is it, Micah?" she called, her tone dripping with false sweetness. Micah glanced back over his shoulder, his jaw clenching. "It's my parents," he muttered, stepping aside to let us in. As we entered, I felt my heart sink. The once tidy apartment was now a mess, empty bottles and discarded takeout containers littering the floor. And there in the corner sat Kara, her ruby-red lips curled into a cruel smile. Well, if it isn't the grandparents," she purred, her gaze sweeping over us. "To what do we owe this pleasure?" Gideon's eyes narrowed, and I could see the muscles in his jaw working. "We're here to talk about Nolan and Lily," he growled, his tone brooking no argument. Kara's smile widened, and she leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs in a calculated gesture. "Oh, the darling little ones," she cooed, her voice dripping with false concern. "Such a shame their father is too busy to take care of them." Micah flinched, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "That's enough, Kara," he snapped, his voice laced with a desperate edge. Gideon stepped forward, his imposing frame casting a shadow over Kara. "The only one who's going to be enough is you, young lady," he said, his deep voice rumbling with barely contained anger. "You've been manipulating my son, and I won't stand for it." Kara's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing her features, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her voice dripping with false innocence. Gideon's hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around Kara's wrist in a vice-like grip. "Don't play games with me, girl," he growled, his face mere inches from hers. "I know you're kind, and I won't let you drag my family down with your filth." Kara winced, her eyes darting to Micah, who stood frozen, a look of shame and resignation etched on his face. In that moment, I saw the broken man my son had become, a far cry from the determined, loving father I had once known. As Gideon and Kara's heated exchange continued, my heart ached for the family we had once been. This wasn't the future I had envisioned for Nolan and Lily. We had to fix this, no matter the cost. The tension in the apartment was thick enough to cut with a knife as Gideon and Kara squared off, their heated exchange punctuated by Micah's desperate pleas for them to stop. "This has gone on long enough, Kara," Gideon growled, his grip on her wrist tightening. "You've manipulated my son for the last time." Kara's eyes narrowed, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Mr. Jennings," she purred, her voice dripping with false innocence. "Micah and I are simply trying to make a living, that's all." Micah shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between Gideon and Kara. "Dad, please, this isn't Kara's fault," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm the one who got myself into this mess." Gideon's jaw tightened, and I could see the muscles in his neck standing out. "Don't you dare try to defend her, boy," he snapped, his words like a whip. "I know the kind of games she's been playing, and I won't stand for it." Kara let out a high-pitched laugh, her features twisting into an ugly mask of disdain. "Games?" she scoffed, her free hand waving dismissively. "I'm simply doing what I need to do to survive, Mr. Jennings. Your son is a grown man, and he made his own choices." Nolan, who had been silently observing the exchange, suddenly spoke up, his voice filled with a surprising conviction. "That's not true," he cried, stepping forward. "Kara's been manipulating Dad, keeping him isolated from us. She's the reason he's been neglecting Lily and me." Kara's gaze snapped to Nolan, her eyes narrowing dangerously. "You little brat," she hissed, her lips curling into a snarl. "How dare you speak to me that way?" Gideon's grip on Kara's wrist tightened, and I could see the fury burning in his eyes. "Don't you dare threaten my grandson," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You're the one who's going to answer for your crimes, girl." Micah, who had been standing quietly, finally found his voice. "Crimes?" he echoed, his eyes widening in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Gideon turned to Micah, his expression hardening. "Your little girlfriend here has been dabbling in some illegal activities, boy," he said, his tone laced with disgust. "Drug dealing, from what Nolan's told us." Micah's face went pale, and he looked at Kara with a mix of horror and betrayal. "Kara, is that true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kara's expression shifted, a hint of panic flashing across her features before she quickly schooled her features into a mask of indignation. "Ridiculous," she scoffed, her free hand waving dismissively. "Nolan is just a child. What would he know?" Gideon's grip on her wrist tightened, and I could see the strain in his muscles. "Don't you dare try to lie your way out of this, girl," he growled. "I have my own ways of finding the truth." I placed a hand on Gideon's arm, feeling the tension coiled within. "Gideon," I said, my voice low and firm, "let's take this outside. There's no need to make a scene." Gideon's gaze met mine, and I could see the conflict raging behind his eyes. Finally, with a frustrated sigh, he released his grip on Kara's wrist, stepping back. "This isn't over, Kara," he said, his voice laced with warning. "You've messed with the wrong family." As we made our way out of the apartment, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The confrontation had been volatile, and I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get much worse before they got better. As we drove away from Micah's apartment, the weight of the confrontation hung heavy in the air. Nolan sat in the back seat, his expression a mix of worry and determination, while Gideon gripped the steering wheel with a white-knuckled intensity. "Well, that went about as well as I expected," Gideon muttered, his brow furrowed in a deep frown. I placed a hand on his arm, offering a reassuring squeeze. "We knew it wouldn't be easy, Gideon," I said, my voice low and soothing, "but at least we know the truth now." Nolan leaned forward, his eyes shining with a newfound resolve. "What are we going to do, Grandma, Grandpa?" he asked, his voice filled with a sense of urgency. "We can't just let Kara and Dad keep hurting Lily and me." Gideon's grip on the steering wheel loosened slightly, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. "Don't you worry, Nolan," he said, his deep voice rumbling with determination. "Your grandma and I have a plan." I met Gideon's gaze, sensing the unspoken message behind his words. "That's right," I said, offering Nolan a reassuring smile. "We're going to put a stop to Kara's schemes and make sure your father gets the help he needs." Nolan's eyes widened with a glimmer of hope. "How?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gideon let out a heavy sigh, his expression softening as he looked at Nolan through the rearview mirror. "I've got some old contacts in this town, son," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Folks who owe me a few favors." I squeezed Gideon's arm, knowing exactly what he was implying. "Gideon, are you sure that's the best course of action?" I asked, a note of concern in my voice. Gideon's gaze met mine, his eyes reflecting the same steely determination I had seen earlier. "Alara, we've got to do whatever it takes to protect our family," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "I won't let that boy and his girlfriend destroy Nolan and Lily's lives." I knew there was no arguing with Gideon when he was like this, so I simply nodded, turning my attention back to Nolan. "Don't you worry, child," I said, offering him a reassuring smile. "We're going to make sure you and Lily are safe, no matter what it takes." Nolan's shoulders visibly relaxed, and he gave us a grateful nod. "Thank you, Grandma, Grandpa," he said, his voice filled with a renewed sense of hope. As we pulled into our driveway, Gideon turned off the engine and turned to face us. "All right, here's what we're going to do," he said, his voice low and measured. "Alara, I need you to stay here with Nolan and Lily, keep them safe, and make sure Lily gets the care she needs." I opened my mouth to protest, but Gideon held up a hand, silencing me. "I'm going to pay a visit to a few old friends," he continued. "See what kind of dirt we can dig up on Kara. With any luck, we'll be able to use that to get Micah the help he needs and make sure Nolan and Lily are taken care of." I studied Gideon's face, seeing the determination etched in every line. "All right, Gideon," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Just be careful, you hear?" Gideon leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead. "Always, Alara," he murmured, his gruff voice betraying a hint of tenderness. As Gideon stepped out of the car and strode towards the house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. I knew Gideon would stop at nothing to protect our family, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to walk a dangerous path. Whatever lay ahead, I was determined to keep Nolan and Lily safe, no matter the cost. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity as Gideon set his plan in motion. I remained at home with Nolan and Lily, tending to the ailing child and trying to provide a sense of stability in the midst of the chaos. Gideon would come and go, his weathered face etched with a grim determination that both comforted and concerned me. I knew he was up to something, but I trusted him to handle it in his own way. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Gideon burst through the door, his eyes alight with a fierce triumph. "Alara, it's done," he announced, his deep voice rumbling with satisfaction. I felt a surge of relief, but also a twinge of apprehension. "What happened, Gideon?" I asked, my fingers tightening around the kitchen towel I held. Gideon strode over to me, his hands grasping my shoulders. "We've got her, Alara," he said, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Kara's been arrested." I blinked, my mind racing to catch up. "Arrested?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "How?" Gideon's grip on my shoulders tightened, and I could see the pride in his eyes. "I called in a few favors, did a little digging," he said, his tone laced with a hint of satisfaction. "Turns out our dear Kara has been running quite the little drug operation." I felt a chill run down my spine, the implications of his words sinking in. "Gideon, what did you do?" I asked, my voice tinged with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Gideon's expression softened, and he pulled me into a gentle embrace. "I did what I had to do, Alara," he murmured, his breath warm against my hair, "to protect our family." I wanted to protest, to tell him that there must have been another way, but deep down I knew Gideon was right. Kara was a dangerous woman, and she had to be stopped before she could do any more harm. "And Micah?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Gideon sighed, a shadow of regret passing over his features. That boy's in a bad way, Alara, he said, his voice tinged with a hint of sorrow. Without Kara's influence, he's finally had to face the consequences of his actions. I felt my heart sink, the weight of our son's struggles bearing down on me. Where is he now? I asked, steeling myself for the answer. At the hospital, getting the help he needs, Gideon replied, his hand gently caressing my cheek. It's not going to be an easy road, but at least now he has a chance to get his life back on track. I felt a surge of hope, but also a deep well of sadness. And Nolan and Lily? I asked, my gaze searching Gideon's face. Safe with us, where they belong, Gideon said, his voice firm and resolute. We're going to make sure they have the stability and support they need, Alara. I promise. I nodded, my eyes brimming with tears of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Gideon, I whispered, leaning into his embrace, for everything you've done. Gideon pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead, his calloused hand cupping my cheek. It's what family does, Alara, he murmured. We protect each other no matter what. As I held on to Gideon, I felt a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. Kara's downfall had come at a heavy price. But now, with Micah seeking help and Nolan and Lily in our care, I knew that our family had a chance to heal and rebuild. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, united by the unbreakable bonds of love and resilience. The days that followed Kara's arrest were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and emotional upheaval. Gideon and I spent countless hours in courtrooms, fighting to secure custody of Nolan and Lily, while Micah faced the consequences of his actions. Nolan, bless his heart, was a pillar of strength throughout it all, steadfastly supporting his siblings and doing whatever he could to help. I marveled at his resilience, a testament to the strength of the Jennings family that had been forged through generations of hardship. As the trial neared its conclusion, Gideon and I found ourselves face to face with Micah, his eyes haunted and his spirit broken. The man who had once been filled with such promise now stood before us, a shadow of his former self. "How could you do this, Dad?" Micah asked, his voice a mere whisper. "Kara, the drugs, everything. How could you stoop so low?" Gideon's expression hardened, his jaw clenching with a lifetime of disappointment. "How could I?" he rumbled, his deep voice laced with a barely contained fury. "How could you, boy? You had a family, a chance to make something of yourself, and you threw it all away." Micah flinched, his gaze dropping to the floor. I know, he murmured, his fingers trembling. "I was so caught up in my own problems, I didn't see what I was doing to Nolan and Lily. I'm so sorry." I reached out, placing a hand on Micah's arm, my heart aching at the sight of my once vibrant son reduced to this broken shell. "Micah, we want to help you," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But you have to be willing to help yourself." Micah's eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw a glimmer of the boy I had once known. "I don't know if I can, Mama," he whispered, his voice laced with doubt. I'm so ashamed." Gideon stepped forward, his imposing frame casting a shadow over Micah. "Shame won't get you anywhere, boy," he growled, his eyes narrowing. "It's time you faced the consequences of your actions and took responsibility for the mess you've made." Micah flinched, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I know, Dad," he murmured. "I know." Gideon's expression softened, just a fraction, and he reached out, placing a weathered hand on Micah's shoulder. "Then do it, son," he said, his voice gruff but tinged with a hint of encouragement. "For Nolan and Lily's sake, if not your own." Micah nodded, a spark of determination flickering in his eyes. "I will," he said, his voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." As we watched Micah walk away, Gideon let out a heavy sigh, his shoulders sagging with the weight of it all. "I just hope it's not too late, Alara," he murmured, his gaze locked on Micah's retreating form. I moved to Gideon's side, slipping my hand into his calloused one. "It's never too late, Gideon," I said, offering him a reassuring smile. "Micah's made his mistakes, but he's still our son. With our help, he can find his way back." Gideon squeezed my hand, the corners of his mouth tugging upward in a small, weary smile. "I hope you're right, Alara," he said, his voice soft. "For all our sakes." As we turned and headed back to the courthouse, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would not be an easy one, but with Gideon by my side and our family united, I knew we could overcome even the darkest of challenges. The sun peeked through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the living room, where Nolan and Lily now spent their days. It had been several months since the tumultuous events that had uprooted our family, and the healing process was slow but steady. Nolan, bless his heart, had taken on the role of big brother with an unwavering determination. I watched as he helped Lily with her homework, his expression filled with a tenderness that belied his years. The court had granted Gideon and me full custody of the children, and we were doing our best to provide them with the stability and support they so desperately needed. As for Micah, he had taken the first steps on the long road to recovery. After a stint in rehab and a series of court-mandated counseling sessions, he had emerged a changed man, humbled, remorseful, and resolute in his determination to make amends. I still remembered the day he had come to our door, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "Mom, Dad," he had said, his voice barely above a whisper, Can I see the kids?" Gideon and I had exchanged a silent look, and I could see the war raging behind his weathered features. Finally, with a resigned sigh, he had nodded. "Come on in, boy," he had said, his gruff tone tinged with a hint of softness. The reunion had been emotional, to say the least. Nolan had hesitated at first, his eyes narrowed with a mixture of distrust and cautious optimism. But as Micah had embraced him, whispering words of apology and regret, the boy's walls had slowly started to crumble. And Lily, oh, how her face had lit up when she had seen her father. She had rushed into his arms, her tiny body trembling with a mix of joy and relief. In that moment, I had seen a glimmer of the family we had once been, and it had filled my heart with a renewed sense of hope. Gideon and I had watched the scene unfold, our fingers intertwined, hearts full of both pride and trepidation. We knew the road ahead would not be an easy one, but we were determined to support Micah in his journey of redemption. Today, as I watched Nolan help Lily with her reading, a soft smile tugged at the corners of my lips. The boy had blossomed under our care, his once haunted eyes now filled with a newfound sense of security and confidence. "How's it going, you two?" I asked, my voice gentle as I approached them. Nolan looked up, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Great, Grandma," he replied, his arm wrapped protectively around Lily. "Lily's really getting the hang of this whole reading thing." Lily beamed up at me, her chubby cheeks dimpling. "Daddy's been helping me too," she piped up, her voice filled with excitement. I felt a swell of pride, both in Lily's progress and in Micah's newfound dedication to his children. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, reaching down to ruffle Lily's hair affectionately. "I'm so proud of you both." Nolan's expression softened, and he reached out to give my hand a gentle squeeze. "Thanks, Grandma," he said, his voice filled with a quiet gratitude, "for everything you and Grandpa have done for us." I felt a lump rise in my throat, and I pulled Nolan into a warm embrace, Lily joining in with a giggle. "You're our family, Nolan," I murmured, holding them close. "We'll always be here for you, no matter what." As we sat together, surrounded by the laughter and love of our reunited family, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of relief and hope. The journey had been long and arduous, but we had emerged stronger than ever, our bonds forged in the fire of adversity. And as I looked to the future, I knew that whatever challenges awaited us, we would face them together, united by the unbreakable ties that bound us as a family.